Hello, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about a very important earnings measure. And in fact, every company is using it. It is the earnings per share. We have seen earnings per share multiple times in this week. We've seen it in the actual Coca-Cola and Zoom income statements. It is the yellow highlighted items that I'm marked in this income statement. So above it, we have the income, net income, right, attributable to share owners. And then there is this called basic net income per share. Net income equals earnings. So basic, and the second one is called diluted net income per share. What are these two? And if we look at Zoom, also we have the net income, the yellow one, right below it is net income per share or earnings per share. They also have a line called basic, another line called diluted. It's just that they don't have such a difference in the actual numbers. So what is the definition for EPS? And what's the difference between basic and diluted? Now, earnings per share is defined as the following. In the numerator, it is the earnings, but it is not just net income. It is net income minus what we call preference dividends. So this part belongs to the preferred shareholders, not the common shareholders. We have to subtract it because we are calculating earnings per share for the common shareholders. Okay, so the net is going to be scaled or divided by a weighted average of ordinary shares outstanding. So the denominator is a number, is the number of shares, and the numerator is a dollar sign, is the total earnings, net incomes. So in the end, is how much earnings, right? How measures the dollars earned by each ordinary shares. I have said that this is a very important business indicator. As you see, every company's, public company's annual report includes this earnings per share right underneath the net income. You see how important it is. And, it's actually, in fact, mandated by GAAP that you have to disclose it in the income statement. Now, what about the basic and the diluted? The basic one is just what we see before, right? Net income minus the preferred dividends divided by the weighted average number of common shares outstanding for the period. Diluted one, what are you diluting it for? Well, it reflects the potential. Look at it, it's the potential, it's not the actual. Potential dilution that could occur for the companies that have certain securities outstanding that are convertible into common shares or stock options that could create additional common shares if options were exercised. So convertible into common shares, it is mainly about the options. When we talk about Tesla and we talk about the stock, the options compensation. So these are the options. Usually a company will have these options issued to their employees. The option says that, by the end of 3 years, 5 years, right, a certain time period, you are entitled to purchase our stocks at the price of blah, blah, blah. Now, this certain price is usually a much lower price than the price in 3 years. Why? Because it's a growing companies. You should believe that, after the 3 years of operations, the company will be worth much more than it was today. So, but you have to hold the company as options for 3 years in order to kind of purchase it in a much lower price. And you have to work in the same company for 3 years. If you leave in the middle, the option will be expired. So this is a very usual way to keep talents. And knowing that there will be options and these options will eventually convert into common shares, that will make our numerator, right? This ordinary number of shares become more and more, so you are divided by a much larger number, the earnings per share will be much lower. So that's why we also need to provide a diluted EPS, because if you are going to make a prediction based on the EPS, you better know what the future EPS would be. It will be smaller because of the options. Okay, let's have a quick exercise. In 2018, this Hoolies Corp reported net income of $1 million. It declared and paid preference share dividends of $250,000. During 2018, Hoolies had a weighted average of 190,000 ordinary shares outstanding. Let us compute the EPS for Hoolies in 2018. Now, I listed the formula below. So we just simply plug in the numbers. We know net income, which is $1 million. This is this part. And we know that preference shares dividends is $250,000. That's this part. And then we also know the denominator is $190,000, right? So we simply plug them in. Then we get a number which is 3.95. Now this has to have a dollar sign. So that means EPS is 3.95. That means for each share of Hoolies, they earn $3.95. Now you may ask me what preference share dividends is. What am I subtracting from net income? If we look back to Coca-Cola and Zoom, look at the purple line here. So above the purple line, we have a consolidated net income, right? This one, we have a consolidated net income. And then we are going to subtract something. This something is attributable, that means distributed. We are going to give this $65 million to the non-controlling interests. So they are, in front of the common shares. So we need to subtract this. This is also part of the preference shares dividends. So we use the consolidated net income 85, subtract 65. That gives us 89.20. And we're gonna use this net income to divide the weighted average shares to get the final EPS. Same as Zoom. Zoom net income is 25,305, but we need to subtract this 3555. What is it? It's undistributed earnings, also attributable to participating securities. That also means there is certain type of securities, they are entitled to some earnings, right? And we have to subtract them because we are calculating EPS for common shareholders. All right. So we know all the definitions. Now, next. So what is weighted average of the shares outstanding, our denominator? What is it? Let's take an example. So this Lawrence Corp has a 2 million shares outstanding at the beginning of 2018. Now, 3 months later, on April the 1st, the company issued an additional 500,000 more shares. What is the weighted average number of shares outstanding for 2018? Oh, okay, so I get it. This means the number of shares outstanding changes during the year. And we have to get, an average between these two. But we cannot simply use this 2, right, plus the 2.5 divided by 2. No, because, we have 9 months of this new shares outstanding. We only have 3 months of only 2 million. So we have to weight them. What are we weighting? We are weighting by months. So 1 year has 12 months, right? So we use this 12 as, a fraction. And we know that, the first 3 months, January to March, there's only 2 million shares outstanding. So the first part is this 2 million, and then we times 3 months out of total 12 months. Now, after the April 1st issuance, we have 2 million plus $500,000, which gives us 2.5 million shares outstanding. And that remains for 9 months, April to December. So it is 2.5 times 9 months divided by 12. And then we sum these two up. We get 2.375 million shares. This 2.375 is the weighted average. Now, rule of thumb, the final result you get must be smaller than the bigger one, smaller than this 2.5, and bigger than the first one. So it must be something in between. If you get something smaller than the 2, you must be wrong. If you get something larger than 2.5, you must be wrong. Now let's do a quick exercise. If we look at Coca-Cola, right? Now I highlighted this basic net income EPS, which is 2.05. Now below this basic and diluted, what do we have? We have a bold line called average shares outstanding, and it is for basic. And we also know that, in 2019, the net numerator for EPS is 89.20. Now let's see whether that's the case. So I'm gonna use the formula for EPS to calculate the basic, which is I'm going to use 89.20, and I'm gonna divide by the average shares outstanding basic, this 4276. I want to see if I use 89.20 divided by 4276, can I get 2.09? Let's see. Divide by 4276 equals, wow, it's too big. Yes, 2.086 equals 2.09. Very good. Now, do you want me to get the dilutive one? That's not hard either. So we still start with the numerator doesn't change, right? It's just the number of shares increases from 4276, increased by 38 to the green one, 4314. So I'm still using the 89.20 as my numerator, which is the net income portion that can be used to distribute to common shareholders. And I divide it by the last row, which is 4314. Whoop, I forgot the division. 4314, which is the average shares outstanding diluted. I get 2.067, so it's 2.07. That's exactly what I get. So now you can try to do Zoom, double check whether the basic and diluted is correct using the weighted average shares as the denominator. Lastly, I want to talk about something that can be easily distinguished by just reading. Some maneuvers that managers can do in the short term to boost EPS without improving the earnings quality or without improving the business model. So we know that in a short term, we have the net income minus the preference dividends divided by the number of shares. That's the formula. So there are two ways to improve this EPS number. The first is to improve the numerator. So I have to improve the net income, right? Numerator. There's some short terms to improve this, shortcuts to improve the net income, which is to cut costs. One of the cute thing to cut costs, most direct one, is to cut interest expense. And how do they cut it? Well, by borrowing less money. If I borrow less, I will have less interest to pay, right? And how do I borrow less? I have existing outstanding debt. I just pay back my payback earlier than I should be before maturity. I pay them back. We call this retiring a bond, retiring debt. So that's one way. The second one is to think of the denominator. Denominator is the number of shares, ordinary shares outstanding. Well, you can reduce the denominators to boost up the whole EPS, right? So you reduce the number of shares by share repurchase. I have a background reading in week 4, background reading. This is a report by McKinsey, and you can check it out. How they talk about how share repurchase boosts earnings without improving returns. Is very interesting. All right, so this is for earnings per share. I hope you have a good understanding of how we calculate EPS, how to calculate basic, how to calculate diluted, as well as how business deal with boosting up EPS. I'll see you in the next video.